The Brooklyn Vegan Show is a podcast about music brought to you by the music blog and online record store Brooklyn Vegan. Make sure to subscribe to hear all of our upcoming episodes featuring interviews with musicians and more, and find us 24/7 at brooklynvegan.com, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Hey, welcome to the new episode of the Brooklyn Vegan Show. I'm BV editor Andrew Sacker, and today's episode is about the 10th anniversary of an album that's also one of my favorite albums of the past 10 years, Turnover's Peripheral Vision. It was a totally game-changing album when it came out in 2015, and it's an album that's only grown in importance since. If you're unfamiliar, Turnover, they came up sort of during the emo revival, new wave of post-hardcore era, this sort of more DIY underground take on various forms of punk rock that kind of started to plant its seeds in the late 2000s and really kind of take off in the early 2010s. And Turnover were very much in that sort of like double time, fast-paced melodic hardcore, like Lifetime, Saves the Day, and then, you know, at that point, Title Fight was kind of the band leading the charge for that kind of music, and Turnover certainly looked up to them, as singer Austin Getz mentions during this episode. But after they made their 2013 debut album Magnolia for Run for Cover, Turnover was sort of starting to develop different interests in music and kind of shy away from that kind of emo pop punk vibe where they originally came from. For Peripheral Vision, they started to get really into dream pop and post-punk bands. They were listening to stuff like The Cure, The Smiths, and newer bands like Wild Nothing and Beach House and Beach Fossils. And that all really came out when they made Peripheral Vision. But at the same time, they still kind of had those emo roots. So it's what makes this album so unique, is that it has the driving backbone of a band that came up in the punk scene, but it also has the sort of gorgeous, glistening atmospheres and melodies of musicians who were fully immersed in listening to dream pop, and it ends up sounding totally different from both of those worlds, both emo and dream pop. And that's why it's so unique and original and still resonates so much today. It came out at a time when a lot of bands in that sort of punk and emo scene were kind of making these pivots towards shoegaze. Title Fight had also helped lead the charge on that. You also had bands on Run for Cover like Cloakroom and Pity Sex coming up, going in a little bit in that direction. And so what Turnover did also kind of fit in that emo shoegaze realm as well, but they really went in a more distinctly dream pop direction, and I think it made the album something that both fit in with the way that the scene was kind of changing at the time, but also stood out from pretty much everything happening in that scene. And again, it's really just all part of what makes it so unique. And it was a risky move for a young band on their sophomore record to make such a drastic change, especially at a time when, you know, Turnover were coming up as the whole sort of emo revival thing was really kind of starting to pick up and get attention from major press outlets. Some of these bands were starting to get booked on major festivals like Coachella. And, it was a Turnover. The safer move might have seemed like to make another driving emo punk record. So for them to make such a drastic stylistic change so early on in their career, it could have seemed like a risk. But Peripheral Vision actually became the band's breakthrough. It's the band it's really the album that put Turnover on the map. It feels in a way more like a debut album at this point, because it put Turnover on the path towards becoming the band that they've been throughout the past 10 years. And it really, everything that this band has gone on to achieve, which is quite a lot, in many ways, all kind of came back to what started on Peripheral Vision. So with the album turning 10, it was a blast to talk to Austin about just this record, what was going on in his life, in the scene, in and around the band at that time, and really dig into what made Peripheral Vision the special record it is, and sort of reflect on it now with 10 years of hindsight. Turnover are playing the album in full on a tour this year. They've got their sister band Citizen are on a lot of the dates. They've got other bands from in and around that same orbit they came up in, like Balancing Composure and Tiger's Jaw, on the tour. Their Virginia neighbors Keep are on select dates, and newer Run for Cover band Horse Jumper of Love is on the tour as well. So it's really a very cool lineup they've got put together. They're going to play the album in full. They're going to do more. And on top of all of that, they've given Peripheral Vision an expanded 10th anniversary reissue. The vinyl version tacks on the two songs from the two-song single they put out in 2016, Humblest Pleasures and Change Irreversible. And there's an exclusive Brooklyn Vegan candied avocado vinyl variant, which is sort of a swirly avocado green, and that's limited to 500 copies, and it's available to pre-order now at shop.brooklynvegan.com. We'll also put the link in the description of this episode so you can pre-order it directly from there. Before we get to the episode, just a heads up to listeners of this podcast that you can get 30% off of your first year's membership at DistroKid. If you're unfamiliar, DistroKid is a service for musicians that allows you to easily upload your music to all major streaming platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, and more. It allows you to do automatic revenue splits so collaborators and co-writers can get paid too. It provides you with an artist page that links to your music on all streaming services and allows you to add lyrics, credits, liner notes, and more. Again, you can get 30% off your first year's membership by signing up at distrokid.com/VIP/BrooklynVegan, and that link is also included in the description of this episode. And now, here's my interview with Turnover's Austin Getz about the 10th anniversary of Peripheral Vision. Hey, Austin, welcome to the Brooklyn Vegan Show. How are you today?
Doing great, man. Thank y'all for having me.
Happy to have you here and happy to be celebrating the 10th anniversary of Peripheral Vision.
Yeah, same here, man. It's been crazy to see everybody being so excited. So definitely excited to celebrate.
Yeah, so you're playing it in full on tour, including multiple dates that sold out pretty immediately. And I think by the time this goes out, you'll have announced that there's a 10th anniversary edition coming. What is your reaction to having an album become classic enough for this kind of treatment?
Honestly, the only thing I can really say is disbelief. It's of course, over the last 10 years, we've realized that the album, means a lot to a lot of people just from, playing so many shows and interacting with people and hearing stories. And it's been inspiring. And, of course, one of the things that keeps us, making music to have it affect other people. But I mean, to see it in this scale, truly something that none of us really thought was the case at all. I said something the other day just about how inspiring it is to see the people around us, everybody who helped make the tour and everything happen, having more confidence in us than we had in ourselves for, one of the first times in my life that's ever been the case, and it's definitely a crazy feeling to just see how right everybody was saying, it does mean this much to people. And yeah, I mean, a lot different shows than we've played. And, yeah, I mean, we were just bewildered in every way, but so excited, and just makes it all the more inspiring and makes us want to just, even more of a reason to celebrate it. I mean, already 10 years of it, we were looking forward to it for so long. I mean, we play a good amount of the songs all the time, and we love the record. And this has just been overwhelming and really, really exciting. So thank you to everybody that might be listening that, has been a part of it and is coming out to a show or has just listened to it at any point and feels a connection. So very grateful.
So even before you announced the tour, you had some doubt on your end, like, can we do venues this big?
Yeah, of course, man. I mean, maybe not, maybe I would like to say I had no expectation, positive or negative. I didn't necessarily think it wasn't going to happen, but certainly didn't think that it necessarily was. I just myself, I never, would have said, hey, let's book a show at a couple of these venues. But, Ground Control, who we've been working with for a few years now, is, they understand the band so well and they're just good friends. And it's just been such an open conversation the whole time that there was a lot of trust there. And yeah, they're completely right. And, yeah, I don't know about doubt, but I mean, yeah, I guess a mild form of it for sure. Just, not that we have imposter syndrome or anything, but a little bit of it, goes with, I think, being, anything in the modern world, seeing so much stuff compared to. And there's also just, I mean, if Turnover is a strange band in some ways, because a lot of the metrics that people use to measure success in the music industry, I feel like we're kind of a certain anomaly of, streaming numbers and stuff aren't as high as some of, bands that we might tour with. And, clearly at this point, it's been proven to us that the live aspect of the band and people wanting to come to the shows, and it's kind of a world that we've built. And I think it comes a lot from, where we come from, playing punk shows and DIY shows and stuff. So that's been another really amazing thing, is just like being so grateful and feeling so, like, I don't want to say proud of, but I mean, in a certain way, yeah, just like so glad that our fans are who they are. And I feel like they represent the band super well, and I just feel like it's going to be a super cohesive moment in the history of the band. So
Yeah, I do think like those roots in like the punk scene and stuff really does go a long way when it comes to, you know, live music like this, because I think, like you said, like eh, I feel like in today's day and age, it's like how many monthly listeners do you have on Spotify? Did you have a song go viral on TikTok? And
mm-hmm.
sometimes you have like millions of listeners and a viral song, but like can't sell out a small club. And I feel like a lot of these bands that did come up the way you came up, it is often you see the opposite, where it's like we might have less listeners, but they're all buying tickets to the show. It's a very dedicated fan base, and they want to come out when their bands, when their favorite bands come through town.
Yeah, and it also, on top of the live aspect of it, is also just the, they're buying the vinyl. I feel like it's people who are, in the product of those things, streaming and TikTok, and a lot of these people that are, playlist listeners and, single, which, I mean, is I consume some music in that way as well. But I feel like a lot of Turnover fans are still the type of people that they want to buy the album, they want to listen to the album, um, just a certain different depth of listening to the band, and creating a relationship with the artist. I feel like it's been I feel like we talked about it when we talked the last time, because I think maybe Myself and the Way had just come out, and we were talking about Reddit and just people's opinions on the music. And it's been not completely straight and smooth road, I feel like, through our musical output, but I love it, because it's just like people obviously care enough to even listen to the album, and I feel like it's not people who are just like, oh yeah, I like this style of music, so I heard this song and I like it because it sounds this way. I think maybe some people do find, especially Peripheral Vision in that sort of way, and then continue to listen through to the whole album and be like, maybe this type of music isn't a type of music I would listen to in another context, but since I am a fan of this artist, I like the song. And so I feel, yeah, it was a really validating experience in that way too, just to, I feel like, get a certain degree more understanding towards our fans, and the relationship we have with them. So it's been super positive.
Yeah, and I think that's also just like that type of relationship. That's one of the best things about these full album tours. Is like as a fan too, it's like you get to go and it's like you subconsciously can feel what song is coming next because you know the album start to finish, and you get to hear like those deeper cuts that you never get to hear. Um, like I remember, just on the topic of full album tours, I remember seeing you guys open for Circuit Survive on their 10th anniversary tour for On Letting Go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like I spoke to Anthony Green about this topic once, and he said like, and it's really stuck with me what he said. He was like, my favorite part of these tours is we get to play the songs that just disappear in our set lists over the years once we keep adding more albums. And I was like, oh yeah, like I kind of never thought about it that way. Like it's not just the experience of I know the record front to back, but it's also like some songs just end up falling by the wayside. And like I feel like these full album tours get to bring back like those deep cuts, and sometimes even the bands get surprised, like, oh, like I didn't know you guys were waiting so long to hear like track 8. We never play that, like something like that.
Absolutely, man. I mean, yeah, I mean, here we are 5 albums in, and we don't even really play any old stuff, and so but I mean, choosing between 50 songs is definitely, I mean, every album we put out, it's at this point, you have to almost kind of consider, like, even though we love every song on this album, there's going to be a few that we're going to be able to probably work into the set, and the other ones, yeah, you do. I mean, fucking, I'll probably have to go back and learn a few parts for, most of these songs I know, like, better than I know anything in the world, but some of them I definitely haven't played in a while or ever lives. So, and other than at practice and stuff like that. So, that's definitely going to be something we're really looking forward to, man. I mean, there's so many. The final track on the record is probably my favorite song on Peripheral Vision. We've never played it live, so I'm really excited about that. And yeah, to just see people who really want to see those songs, and even the sleeper ones. Like, I mean, if there's one that's not everybody's been waiting for it, that's almost, I feel like that's usually me in the crowd. You know what I mean? It's like if there's one that's like, for some reason I just really like it, but nobody else is like really that hype on it. That almost is a more intimate connection, because you're like, oh, this is hella awesome that they're playing this, and it's such a deep cut. So I'm really excited about that aspect of it, and we're just gonna have to figure out what of the other ones don't need to fall by the wayside. That kind of stuff is like, it makes me think that the jam bands had it right, man. Like back in the day, just playing different set literally every show you ever play, so that way none of the songs get forgotten. But then you got to really have a certain intimate connection with the audience, because they have to trust you enough to be like, all right, we might not hear a single hit tonight, but I like you enough to where it's just like all good. So maybe that'll be the next journey we go down. We'll see.
I'm glad you say that because in the back of my head, I wanted to be like, well, the Grateful Dead made it work, jam bands make it work, but I was like, you know what? I won't bring up jam bands on the Turnover podcast. so, so I'm
Nice.
glad you brought it up because I mean, I think it would be cool if some bands outside of the jam world would kind of adopt that like unpredictable, like we're going to do 3 nights in your city and you're going to hear different songs if you go all 3 nights kind of thing.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I think it's so awesome. I mean, from our side, obviously, it's much more fun because you just get to, not that it gets boring playing the same songs. It's different people every night, and it has so many unique things about it. But there's definitely times where we're jamming at sound check, and I'm like, man, I really want to play this one. But then it comes down to just, all right, well, which one do we cut? And each one you go down through, you're like, we can't cut that one. So it's man, I mean, it's a whole part of artistry in itself, set list design, that's for sure. I mean, we're trying to figure out what exactly we're going to do for this tour, so we'll see what it ends up being.
Yeah, because I mean, I would like the album is only what like 35 minutes, so I would imagine or 39 minutes. I have it on Spotify now. So yeah, I would imagine you're gonna do some surprises afterwards or before.
Oh yeah, I mean, I feel like the last few tours, I mean, that's one thing, just for one, we just like to play music, and two, it's getting harder and harder to cut the songs as each album comes out. So I mean, I feel like usually at this point we play anywhere between and an hour is usually short, and it's up to an hour and a half. So we'll definitely have a bunch of other songs to be playing, but figuring out which ones and how to space it all out will be a whole thing in itself.
Maybe take another page out of the jam band book and give us like a 20-minute version of New Scream or something.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple parts on there where I listen to it and I'm like, this thing could go off into space for a little bit. It could be fun. I mean, that is another thing that's really exciting about it too, is I feel like most people at this point have heard us play the Peripheral Vision songs, over the last 10 years. And I mean, pretty much all of them are, I don't know, maybe not quite significantly, but pretty different from how they are on the record, whether it's slightly different vocal melody or Casey's drum parts different. A lot of the bass parts have changed, like different guitar parts added in and out. So that's another aspect you get to, we kind of are always adding different amounts too. So maybe for this one, since it's the Peripheral Vision tour, I'm sure we'll go a little bit more into depth with some of those expansions of the songs in a live context, just because, like you said, it's only 39 minutes. So I think there's definitely space, and the people love the parts so much. So we almost don't, have that benefit there to where it's not some random jam part where you're like, what is this? It's like when you listen to New Order and there's a part that goes on for hella long, you're psyched on it because you know the part and you get into that drony sort of mindset. So we'll probably definitely go off on some of the parts, and that'll be really fun to do on this tour.
Yeah, I agree. And then it's like you get that big payoff too, like when the chorus does kick back in.
Yeah, do some cool transition stuff with it all too, and we're gonna try to find a way to make it elevated from just playing the album as it exactly is.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to see it in New York. You guys are playing Brooklyn Paramount. Have you been there yet?
I have not.
It's pretty crazy. It's like I don't know how much you know about it, but it's like this very old theater that like jazz legends like Ella Fitzgerald and stuff would play there back in like the 40s and 50s, and then they just closed it for decades, and they recently reopened it and they renovated it and stuff. It's kind of funny because they've kind of been booking like a handful of punkier bands. Like I saw like the story so far in Super Heaven and Koyo there, and I saw Rise Against and Ellis Dunes there. And behind the bar, it'll be like 1952 we had Miles Davis, or like 1953 we had Little Richard, and then it'll be like tonight the story so far, and it's like kind of. But it's a surprising yet very cool place for this kind of music to happen.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing, man. I mean, does it look all historic in there? Like the
Yes, it still looks like it's gutted, like there's no it's all standing, but like the architecture is like very like early 20th century.
hmm Yeah, I mean, all my favorite venues are grateful to play anywhere, of course, but some of these venues nowadays, man, I mean, they look so like no style to them at all. So my favorite is definitely always when there's like an old historic looking building or theater or something like that. There's definitely a few that we played in New York that I love, but I'm stoked to hear that this one is like that because I honestly wasn't really expecting it to be a place like that. I was expecting it to just be a more big size club in the city.
Yeah, no, it's unique. I'm excited for you to see it.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I'm really excited to play there.
So, I think since we're reflecting on Peripheral Vision, I think something that is really interesting about this album is that at this point, it's probably looked at by most fans as your breakthrough record. But at the time, it was kind of a risk, and I think that's like a little bit unique in hindsight. Like it was like a lot of times you think about a band's like breakthrough as kind of like maybe like the thing they had been working towards, and this was sort of like a pivot from what you had been working towards. So I feel like it has this unique place. So what I want to get into is, before this album, you were kind of primarily known for like this double time pop punk melodic hardcore kind of thing. And then this record was a big shift from that. So I think to set the stage for Peripheral Vision, it would be helpful to reflect a bit on your first album, Magnolia, the EPs before that. Like, so the last time that we spoke, you had kind of mentioned that like even before Magnolia came out, your taste started to shift away from the style of your earlier work. Can you sort of talk about that period when you were leading up to the release of Magnolia and touring behind it, and the changes that you and the band were starting to go through that were putting yourselves on the path that would become Peripheral Vision?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, the early stuff I feel like is just straight up, yeah, double time, like melodic hardcore, Lifetime, early Saves the Day, Jawbreaker. Those are, the movie Life. Those are all of our influences, which definitely still bled into Magnolia. But I just feel like at that point we had started to, venture out from that into 90s emo stuff, Sunny Day Real Estate and Texas is the Reason, Knapsack, stuff like that. And just also through that, just more, I mean, a little bit more well known rock music from the 90s. I mean, there was a point before Magnolia where I really wouldn't listen to anything without the D beat. You know what I mean? And it was, so yeah, just a lot of expanded horizons in that way. I feel like just trying to play, I feel like that is really where we started being influenced by, those bands not always doing really fast, overblown chords. And it was started to be more of like the intricate guitar work, that you hear in all those 90s emo bands. And, but we just, of course I also feel like at the time when Magnolia came out was myself probably one of the times where I was maybe the least musically inspired, just because we had been touring such an insane amount for, a couple of years, and not really seeing any growth. I mean, the shows are fun, but I said something about it the other day as well, just like pretty much playing shows to just our friends, and of course it was hella fun, but you're at the end of it, you're starting to see just people do other shit, and so it's getting kind of grueling. And just listening, I feel like touring at that point was I had like run through all of us, really, just the same music in the van every day, like 6 hours a day. So I feel like I was feeling a little bit yeah, I mean, I of course was still listening to music all the time, but not feeling. I remember at that time feeling as though I wasn't very clear on like what type of music I wanted to make, which has always been why we make music, because you hear a song and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to hear more music like this, and maybe you can't find exactly what you want to hear, so then you have to make it yourself. And I've always had such a strong feeling of that with any type of music I make. And I remember at that time almost feeling like it was a little bit like I had to really pick up the guitar and try to write. But I think it was probably because of that, almost like I wasn't learning a new instrument, but certainly growing out of just playing, power chords with slight modulations to them. So, yeah, I feel like that is kind of looking back. I never really thought about it, honestly, before you just asked me that. But listening back on Magnolia and thinking about listening to American football and, like I said, bands that are having like some more intricate guitar work and, laying off the distortion and stuff, I do think started kind of coming through on Magnolia. And when we go to play these, we're probably going to, I know a lot of people definitely want us to play Magnolia songs, and it's definitely something that we've been talking about doing for the last few tours. But it's kind of that same thing we were talking about with set lists, where we're like, okay, we want to throw in Hollow, but which one are we going to cut? And then we're like, oh shit, can't cut any of them. But it's interesting to look back and like be playing them, because a lot of those songs that at that time, now if we play them more in the current turnover style or even Peripheral Vision sort of style, then a lot of the parts and stuff, I think they even sound better. But it's listening back on Magnolia, it's obviously that we still had our feet so much in the half stack, really turned up, everything super loud. So it is interesting to look at that and look at the way that the parts are written, and kind of like apply the modern production mindset to it, and see how it really is a little bit more of a traceable line than I sometimes think of it. I mean, a lot of times when I think about the EP and then the split in Magnolia and then Peripheral Vision, I'm like, holy cow, it's like, sounds like two different bands. But really, I think you can draw it a little bit easier with some of the modern takes on it. So that's another thing on this tour I'm really excited about, to work some songs from the older catalog in, and give them a sort of new life in the same way that we've done a lot of the PV ones. Like I said, we play them different live, but so yeah, it was kind of getting into just expanding what we were listening to. And at that point, I do feel like that was one of the bigger kind of world that we had started to get into.
I do think that through line, like it comes through more with hindsight. Like when I listen to Magnolia now, I feel like I hear a band that's kind of caught between, do we do what we did on the Citizen split? We kind of don't want to. And I feel like you can hear some songs, you can hear like the gears are turning for Peripheral Vision. Like it's there somewhere, but it's not quite fully realized yet.
Yeah. Also in Magnolia was Kyle was still in the band, and I mean him and Casey honestly wrote, I mean, a pretty good amount of stuff on there, like even completely separate of my ideas. You know what I mean? So he's definitely a big influence on that record that you can hear. I like Seed Wong, Pray for Me, like those like rhythm guitar and drum parts are just him and Casey like jamming in the studio and in the practice spot. So that's obviously another huge part of the blend of things happening there, is because I feel like it's like the parts of me that were going on to maybe follow the line that became what we were listening to and stuff for Peripheral Vision. But Kyle, he of course liked a lot of the same music as well, but he always had a very he had a separate side of his musical taste that I feel like he was always putting me on to new stuff, and definitely had a unique way of writing. So that's a very large part of Magnolia as well. Him and Casey had a very specific dynamic between the two of them that was very different between me and Casey's way of writing too. So added a lot of its own style.
Right, like even you switching from just singing to playing guitar and singing, even that I feel like had a big impact on the change of things.
I mean, absolutely. I didn't even really think about it too much at the time, but I mean, it's just having to compartmentalize your brain that much, you know what I mean? Like, changes so much of what you're going to do when you're just singing a melody or just thinking about playing guitar. So it definitely changed a lot. And also that's the first record with Will. So that also changed a ton. So, I mean, so much happened at that record. I mean, we were also literally slept in our van to record that record. So honestly, really freaking crazy time. And looking back on it, I'm like, damn, went through freaking crazy fire at that point. But a lot of things. I mean, listing them all out here now, definitely changed at the time, or were significantly different between any of the music before that and that. That was our first time ever in any sort of studio that wasn't just in somebody's house. So a huge learning and growing point for us, Magnolia. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely I think that relationship with Will obviously has a huge I mean, has he done every Turnover record at this point, or I forget if you did the last one without him.
Yep. No, he's done every album. Everything since Magnolia. Yeah, the EPs, everything's been with Will. We actually just we are doing some songs with our front of house engineer. He also has a studio, Zach. So we're doing some songs with him now. But five LPs, 3 EPs, all with Will. So it was the beginning of that relationship, which obviously has shaped so much of the band.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Like, I mean, obviously, he's such a big part of so many bands, like, kind of in this orbit of bands. And it's really interesting because, I mean, at this point, like, like you see on Twitter or whatever, people will be like, "What are the best Will Yip records?" Obviously, Peripheral Vision's always in that conversation. But I think what's really interesting about Turnover, Turnover and Citizen is like when you guys kind of signed to Run for Cover and started working with Will Yip, like I feel like you were sort of the first two bands that did those things, like because you looked up to bands that did those things. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that label and Will as a producer were kind of just like slowly getting their footing also, and then it seemed like the Turnover Citizen like entering that world at that time was kind of like this ever so slightly younger generation being like, oh, like we like aspire, we're not from Pennsylvania, we want to get there to work with Will, like we want to like be on Run for Cover. Is that something that you like relate to? That, like, tell me a little bit about like that period where you're like, sort of, hope, like first getting on this label that had these records that you were a fan of, and like working with this person who, like worked with Title Fight, worked with like Balancing Composure, like et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's another thing that is so special about what we were talking about with like our specific type of fans and like that scene. I still don't even know how to ever really articulate what that scene is, because of course, like it bleeds out. Like when we were growing up, the same promoters that did hardcore shows were, doing shows for Title Fight and Transit and Balancing Composure and Tiger's Jaw. And I honestly think that's one of the things that's so special about that scene is like it's such kind of a quick turnover. Like our main influences, we started the band or like 17, were people who were only like, however much older Vinny is than me, like the movie Lifetime. I'm like, that's so much closer than trying to emulate a band from the 60s or, I mean, even like the 90s. I mean, I guess, the 90s, but it's, so, I mean, I think that is a really special thing about it is how tangible your heroes are at a young age, and they're just interchangeable with your friends because we had played shows with all those bands. We knew them all. Of course, also, I mean, Title Fight was and is my favorite band. But that's the other thing that's so special about it is your favorite band isn't some far away, crazy rock star thing. It's, yeah, I'm just like a kid like you. And the bands that we also like as Title Fight Balance were also these bands that were still only, probably 10 to 15 years older than we are. And so I feel like it inspires a really sort of, your peers and the people that are slightly below you and slightly above you are trying to bring you up in like the same way that, we were like, oh, these bands sound how we want to sound. They're our friends. They work here. So we're going to try to do that and follow this path. And then you, of course, hope you can do the same for bands as you get bigger. So I feel like that really just does not exist anywhere else. And, I mean, it's literally everything. You know what I mean? Like, I can't understate like how much I think that is responsible for the fact that Turnover is literally a band that ever did more than play, a few shows. It's like it is impossible in the world that we live in to just be completely on your own and just, break through everything. And, someone's going to help you get there. And our scene of it just happens to be the people who are helping us aren't big labels and managers and people propelling you to the top with money. It's like people slowly paving this path that, is so community driven. And, yeah, I mean, it was everything to us at that point. You know what I mean? Like that, looking at the promoters that those bands book shows with is how we figured out where to fucking send the van next. You know what I mean? And I mean, certainly with like recording with Will, Will did that first record for an insanely low amount of money. You know what I mean? Just because, and obviously we were making no money. We were sleeping in the van. So it's just this thing of, you're finding a network of people that are down to eat shit to make what you want to happen. You know what I mean? And I think that that's why our fans are who they are. And I think that that's why we've had any success and been able to keep going through the years of what we have been able to go through, because, you're not used to just automatically, getting it. You have to follow a path that's been set before you by people and be inspired by your friends. And, yeah, I think that it's also tied into itself because people have been there along the way, and they're people who are friends of friends and a community of people that are then down to form a relationship with the band. And the people are sucked into that same world, like I say, I got tired of playing shows to just our friends, but it's like, don't get me wrong. I mean, that is exactly who I'm so happy was at all of those shows, because now when we go to any city, it's like I know a bunch of people just because they were the same people who were into that stuff, and they were also our fans, also our friends. And it was never a us and them type mentality with, the bands that we were inspired by from the jump, and then the kind of ones that brought it back for our specific generation. It's funny to think about, like a lot of times I think at that point, Title Fight was the band that we were like, oh, this is like a hardcore band, but they're playing music that's like emotional. And I'm always like, yeah, they were like the ones that did it for our generation. And at that time, it felt that way because like they're 18 and we're 16 or whatever it was. But then I'm like, really, like, what am I talking about? Modern, like the other bands that Movie Life was putting music out, definitely not a whole generation before. So it's just funny how different time moves when you're a kid, and how those we were covering Saves the Day and Movie Life and Jawbreaker songs when they were probably less than 10 years old, which feels funny now, but then felt just like so normal, So I think it's everything is sort of shrunk down into this world that is like conducive for the budding of new art. You know what I mean? It's like a very supportive place. And finding Will was definitely a result of that, as has pretty much anything in the story of Turnover has been.
Yeah, I mean, on that sort of like generational and like time and aging note, like I could talk about that forever. It's something I think about so much. Because I like literally exactly what you're saying. In 2010, like I would have been calling the Movie Life like a classic band and looking at Title Fight as like this new like up and coming band of a new generation, or like like I mentioned earlier, like I remember watching you guys open for Circa Survive on a 10th anniversary tour, and I was like, going to see Circa Survive play a 10-year-old album. I'm like, oh, this is like an old classic from a lifetime ago. And then now to see Peripheral Vision be played for 10th anniversary, I'm like, oh yeah, it's like this album that came out when I was also an adult. Like it doesn't feel like the same distance as seeing like a Circa record that came out when I was a teenager, and now I'm seeing it like out of college.
Right.
Yeah.
It feels so different, man. And honestly, that point is, I mean, one of the main things I've been really reflecting on with this is just how your perception is so fucking trippy, because it's like, of course, when we're like even deciding should we do Peripheral Vision shows, it's because we're like, we don't feel at all that we are in our like legacy era. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying Circa Survive did feel that way at that time. I don't know that they did. I mean, they were certainly at different stages in their lives than we were, had kids and wives and houses and stuff. I mean, I'm married now, but, Nick did just have a, here I am convincing myself it lied. But, I mean, I feel as though they were, slightly further along in the traditional sense of life than we were at that point. But, we were wondering, is that what this is? Like, because, I mean, I love all of Circus Survive's music, because I think their new music is great too. And so maybe that is also just my perception as, someone who was older at the time. I would be interested to actually talk to someone who's a huge Circa fan about their idea of the band at that time and versus now, or, before that record came out. But we were so interested in that for ourselves, of just, we don't feel as though we're in our legacy era. We are constantly still hella inspired on all different types of new music and trying to make new music and push artistic boundaries and all this and all that. And, but the album is 10 years old. It's facts. So we're like, damn, it's crazy. I mean, of course it had come out when we were relatively young, but, it's another thing to just like consider. Like, I wonder if, what people's ideas of that is seeing a 10th anniversary tour. Because I also think, I was trying to think of other bands that I've seen certain albums played anniversaries, but I actually don't know if I've ever seen a 10-year tour. It's always older than that. Like, I saw the Pet Sounds 50th anniversary. So obviously It's so old that it's like, there's no question that it's this very old thing. But 10 is new enough to where it's kind of on that line of, is this a tour where it's like, oh, this is I feel like certain tours, when bands do anniversaries, or they run the risk more so than than any tour to come off as cash grabby or gimmicky or something like that. Because a regular tour just doesn't have that aspect to it at all. It just shows, but this is in celebration of something older. So I feel like there's just that thing, at least in my head, that's something to consider, is how it would be perceived. But yeah, I mean, we feel that it's such a opportune time and is kind of conglomerating at a really interesting point in the band as well, that we're excited about, just because after Peripheral Vision, in kind of the same way as we did with Peripheral Vision after Magnolia, kind of a pivot away from the sound. After Peripheral Vision, I mean, Good Nature is arguably closer to Peripheral Vision than Peripheral Vision is to Magnolia, but I do feel that there we started pivoting away from the emotional emo-ness. It's started being, major seventh chord maybe. Instead it's like happy with a tinge of sad rather than just like bleak. So it's interesting now, and also just of different types of music. I feel like Good Nature and then Altogether and Myself in the Way progressively get a little bit more dynamic, whether it's straight dance music style stuff, psychedelic rock, whatever. It just kind of starts branching out after Peripheral Vision. I feel like is when we sort of all collectively, for the first time, weren't interested in strictly making alternative rock music of some wide umbrella, and it's not like we intentionally weren't trying to make any music like that. I mean, on every record, I think there are some songs that still harken back to that spirit of the band, which is why I think that, if you go and listen to a Turnover song that sounds like a disco song, it still has a certain heart that, like, if you played it next to, anything, like any old disco music, it's not going to completely fit in, which is, has been a point of a little bit of frustration for me sometimes, candidly, but I think it's actually a good thing, because I've talked to some people about that, about how when we started to want to make Peripheral Vision, our goal was not for it to be really kind of as like rock as it is. We were listening to more, I don't know, stuff that was just a little bit, not as heavy hitting, like the Smiths versus, I mean, something where you hear The Room a bunch, I mean, like, but I think because we didn't really have the prowess or the finesse of doing that at the time, it kind of became what it is, which was just more authentically us. And I think that that's kind of been something that's happened for every record. But at this point, for the 10-year anniversary for Peripheral Vision, I feel like it's kind of coming at a really opportune time, just because we've kind of naturally made our way back to rock. And in a little bit more of a specific way, just like I feel like we're listening to more rock that has like that certain like energy to it that we stepped away from for a couple of albums. Not that it's like music that is just sounds like Peripheral Vision or anything, but I feel like there's a certain spirit to just, it's not maybe a laid back swingy beat, or like a four on the floor style energetic beat. It's still got the push of like the backbeat that a rock song would have. And I feel like just kind of the where the band is in a group consciousness is kind of, and probably sort of because of the Peripheral Vision tour. I mean, I know I've listened to the record probably more in the last few months than I had in the last few years, just reminiscing on it. But yeah, I feel like it's going to be really fun, because I feel like the new music that we're working on is, I think Peripheral Vision fans will find more in common with it than some of the more previous music. So it feels like a nice synchronicity there.
Yeah, I think that's cool. I like when these anniversary tours, like, I think there used to be a sense of, if you're doing an anniversary tour, you're admitting that like you've creatively peaked. And now they're so common. Like, a band just does one and they just get right out there next time with their new record. And it is cool, I think, when it kind of is something where maybe it sets the stage for it. And I do think that one of the reasons, like you said, like one of the reasons I do think it is a good idea to celebrate the album is, like you said, like it is sort of this unique period in Turnover's career. Like it's not like Magnolia, it's not like Good Nature. Um, and I think what makes it so special is that thing you touched on where it's like yeah, maybe you were aiming for the Smiths or Cocteau Twins or Beach House or something, but you were still kind of playing like an emo band. And I think that's why it's so unique, is because it sounds like this third other thing that like isn't quite an emo band, but like also isn't quite like a stereotypical dream pop band either.
Totally, man. And I mean, it's so hard to notice that happening in the moment, but I mean, really, if you think back on any music, I guess that's how it always happens, right? Like when they invented distortion, the freaking cone was just ripped. You know what I mean? It's kind of just like you do something a little bit wrong, and then you think, oh, maybe it's not wrong; it's just different. And so I feel like Peripheral Vision was definitely the first time that we had really experienced that. I feel like a lot of times when, at least when we were younger, we always, of course, were trying to make our own music, but you kind of start as an emulator because, you pick up your guitar and you're like so inspired by the music that you hear that you want to learn how to play it. So you learn how to play it. And then, you're kind of learning yourself through emulating other artists. And I feel, um, like Peripheral Vision was the first time when we really like showed ourselves who we were without even really knowing it, because like I said, like you had this idea of the music you might think you're making, and then it was really until I was talking to Mason from Citizen. He does a bunch of other artistic work, directs videos, and helped us on production for some of our tours. But it was after we put out Good Nature and he was on tour with us, and he was like, man, like I love Good Nature, but I like Peripheral Vision more just because it sounds like nothing I've heard, because I can tell that you guys liked, whatever and whatever bands, but because you like grew up playing with Title Fight and Citizen and, your style of music, it sounds like completely like you guys. So I didn't even realize it until, it was kind of said to me by a friend after. Um, but I really do think that was the first time where we kind of like stopped just being emulators and we're just like purely making music that, was kind of coming from us. I mean, of course, we like were doing taking inspiration from other things, but I feel like that's the first album where we were, you know, good enough players and confident in ourselves and artists enough, and also unconcerned with the reception enough to where we could, just fully be doing what we wanted to do. So I think that's why it's kind of a defining moment.
Yeah. Um, and so if Magnolia kind of found you getting into like 90s emo and stuff, moving away from the D beat kind of thing, tell me like what were some of the things that you were listening to that pushed you towards Peripheral Vision? When did you get into that stuff? How did you find that stuff? Like what took you from, like the kind of the Lifetime to the Sunny Day Real Estate to whatever the kind of list of influences on Peripheral Vision pipeline is?
It's kind of hard to say, man. I mean, like I said, at that time we were touring so much and listening to so much stuff just all over the place. I mean, there's so much music that I feel like at that time was kind of that light. Like I would hear something, save it in my phone, and then like be like, okay, cool. Like let's try to jam a song like this. And it was like a artist that I had one song from on a band camp somewhere. But of course, I honestly feel it was the same way for me with kind of the main. I mean, I feel like at that point, my favorite band that I was listening to all the time was The National, and I can't really even remember how I actually think I got into them from a movie I saw. I've had their song "All the Wine" in it, and then I just delved back through the whole catalog and like loved it so much. But At the same time, I kind of found I always really liked the like drivey national songs that were like a little bit faster, like kind of in the like block party, like Strokes ish spirit of stuff. That was another band that kind of led us from like rock, like, I don't know, more emo stuff into indie was Block Party. I don't know why they kind of always. I feel like there is a certain branch of indie rock that has kind of always existed in the spot that we do. That's like, it's not as indie as the most, like Vampire Weekend or something like that when they were small, but it's has a certain more emo or alternative rock side to it, like Block Party or the Yeah Yeah Yeahs or Interpol or something like that. I think honestly from early skate videos and stuff was probably where a lot of that came from, because I identified with like the emotionality of it, but it wasn't. It had a little more finesse to it, not all distorted all the time. And then I feel like at that same time that we were kind of like listening to a lot of that stuff was the captured tracks thing was a huge influence at the time. And Casey was, I remember when we were recording Magnolia, Casey was jamming the self-titled Beach Fossils record all the time, and he was already like he loved the band, and that was kind of when like me and Danny might have been familiar with them already, but I was kind of getting put onto them and starting to really like them and Wild Nothing and Dive and the whole scene Captured Tracks had going on. Which I think another reason I was attracted to that was because it reminded me so much of what we had with all the Run for Cover bands. It seemed like a community of like people that, the first couple times I saw Beach Fossils, it was, at small clubs in Richmond and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is like the same place I'd see a punk band, it's so while we were finding, that kind of generation of the movie lifestyle stuff, maybe, which was like the 90s, indie bands like the National and Block Party and all that stuff, felt like there was a certain through line there that I was hearing in the Captured Tracks bands of the time. And so I feel like that was kind of like another one of the things we were talking about with the title fights and the Tiger's Jaws for the earlier stuff was, then I was seeing like Beach House and Beach Fossils use the jazz chorus, and then at the same time, Shane from Title Fight was using one. And when we went to go to Guitar Center for the first day on recording PV, there was a JC 120 just sitting in there, and Will was like, "You should get that," and I got it, and it's still the same one I have. So yeah, I feel like those were kind of the convergence of worlds at that time for me with Peripheral Vision that I was very influenced by, was some of those 90s indie rock bands, Interpol, Block Party, the National, and then the Captured Track stuff. And I mean, also a lot of stuff. I mean, like I feel like that's when Danny, maybe not quite too deep, but into, New Order, The Cure. I mean, we'd always liked the Smiths and stuff. I feel like they're another band that somehow worked it, at least in Virginia Beach, worked its way into people who like only liked, punk-ish or melodic hardcore music. Somehow still there would be like Smith shirts at the show. So we had already, liked their music, but I feel like I started getting deeper into them and Morrissey and Johnny Marr and some just jangly, like random stuff from the 80s that I feel like was kind of the progenitor of the, really riffy, clean, chorused out rock. And the shoegaze stuff too, I guess, during that period was pretty influential. I mean, yeah, like Ride, MBV, all the like, I feel like a lot of there's not too much of it. When I listened to Peripheral Vision, we were maybe a little bit on Take My Head with the fuzziness of it. I mean, Dinosaur Jr. at that time has always been pretty big. But like that, it doesn't come through quite as much maybe on Peripheral Vision, the shoegazy element of it. But I feel like, yeah, the chorused out kind of where the melodies sit were probably influenced by, Cocktail Twins and Slow Dive, and Ride was definitely a very big one, especially for Danny and Nick at that time. So kind of all over the place, but I feel like, yeah, honed into that indie side that was still pretty, I mean, The Cure is about as emo as it gets, I guess, but it's just whatever that's called. I don't want to say it's a goth at all, but yeah, the stuff, the beginnings of getting into indie rock that just, I feel like, tied into where we came from the having the emotional, melodic hardcore and stuff like that in the 90s emo music, from the Magnolia era, kind of transitioned into those things.
Yeah, it's always kind of crazy just to hear about like other people having like parallel experiences because like I grew up in New York and it was the same thing. Like everybody who liked punk and emo like always also like Block Party and the National and of course The Cure and the Smiths. And it's like I'd love like to like I feel like a fun task would be like to come up with like a canon of albums that are like not punk and emo but all punk and emo people love them or something like that.
That would actually be a sick list to read. Because
um
there were a few of those shirts, you know what I mean? Like,
mhm.
and I mean, I feel like it is from kind of the same thing we're talking about, like, like bands that kind of just like don't come from just like corporate. I feel like a lot of those bands have like a story to them, like they came from somewhere that was based in community, and I feel like that is kind of like the thing that ties all of that music together. You know what I mean? It starts from the underground.
It's also just like the more you zoom out, the more like it really is all the same thing. Like it's like at the end of the day, like I feel like what is the real difference between turnover and dive other than just like the perception of a run for cover band versus the perception of a captured tracks band?
100%, man. Yeah, I mean, it really, that is one thing that this band has taught me more than anything, is that perception is really everything. And it's really hard to figure out where yours stands in comparison to everyone's, because it's just everybody's perception is so different. I mean, we were talking about it a lot on this tour, just figuring out who we were going to bring out. And I was just talking to everyone I could and be like, all right, what do you think ideal, like if you could see any bands you wanted to on the Peripheral Vision tour, who would it be? And I mean, the stuff that was I would hear would just make me realize that it was just so all over the place. Some people would be like, oh man, I think Dive would be so sick, and some people would be like, what? No, I would never think that. And yeah, I mean, it obviously, it makes sense to the more we thought about it, it just made sense for us to have the people that are exactly what we're talking about. What ties all of this music together is where you come from, and the people that are a part of the world that you've built together. And I'm definitely stoked that the bands that we that we're bringing are from where we're from and have been there for the whole story. And it's funny talking about all this stuff since Peripheral Vision, because it's almost like as I get older, like I find that the stuff that I'm into is like kind of the same stuff I loved when I was a kid. And not even just musically, just as a human being. And it's kind of the funny thing to think about with the bands that we were taking on the tour, and like we're talking about perception, because it's like Citizen and Balance and Composure to me are more different than Turnover than Dive or Beach Fossils is from Turnover, easily musically. But there's just something about, like we're saying, about it being not even necessarily about that, but more so just about who's a part of, like, who did you build this thing with, who was there, where do you come from. You can't ever really get away from where you come from, you know what I mean? And not that we'd ever want to, but this tour I feel like has really been showing us that, is it's like it's not just about the music or any of that. The music is just that very thing. It's just a soundtrack to like this crazy, whatever your experience might be to that music, which for us has been, our whole lives of making friends and figuring out ourselves as artists and all this and all that. And that's who's been around. So it's really been cool to just kind of get a check about like what matters and um, yeah, just think on things in a different way.
And it's cool how it translates to like like the fan base is part of the community too. You know, like where it's like Tiger's Jaw, who are also on this tour. Like I've heard some pretty funny stories of Tiger's Jaw playing hardcore shows because of Title Fight. And hardcore kids love Tiger's Jaw, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
back in the day and now. And I think if that exact band with that exact music just wasn't like best friend bands with a melodic hardcore band, then I don't
Not
think hardcore kids would listen to Tiger's Jaw. You know, like,
definitely
um,
not.
but it's like the community that the bands foster like translates to the fans where and it's like yeah like what could be more perfect for Peripheral Vision than Tiger's Jaw, Balancing Composure, and Citizen? Because if I had to if I was a betting man I would I'd bet that any person who has tickets to Peripheral Vision tour knows a lot of words to a lot of songs by those bands.
100%, man. I mean, it's the same thing you were saying about Tiger Jaw playing the hardcore shows with us. It's like, I mean, our early stuff, yeah, is definitely more in line with Title Fight than Tiger's Jaw. You know, like it has, you know, the D beat and all that energy. But, um, I mean, nowadays, dude, you know what I mean? Like, I would say Tiger's Jaw is even closer to hardcore music than us. You know, so
Hmm.
it feels really good for that reason too, because it's like, despite you know, I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of kids that listen to Peripheral Vision that don't listen to their music as well because they aren't into that type of music. But um, I think that you know we are still for that same reason as Tiger's Jaw and just being where we came from and our story and the you know people care more about I feel maybe not more but care just as much about the music or whatever the fashion or the whatever type of art just as much as that they care about you know the story of it and the why and the intention of it you know and so yeah the band just feel perfect and they feel like it feels like it's gonna I said on my Instagram like it just feels like it's gonna be like this crazy circus of like the scene you know what I mean and it feels so funny to me because we were thinking on it about who to bring in balance of course we've actually never toured with so we were excited about that and for a second we were like, oh, Citizen, like we've toured with them so many times. And then I was like, dude, it's been so long though. Like at this point, I think it's going to have been like 7 or 8 years. And so we were like, man, yeah, I mean, this is perfect. You know, it's just going to be all the people that have been there all on the way. It feels like the fan base is going to bleed from the green room to the stage, just into the crowd. You know, like it's feeling very much like there's not much of a barrier anywhere or in sometimes we go on tour I mean especially us because we don't really fit in anywhere but there's always like or not always but sometimes there's a little bit of the you know I mean there's a certain calm that comes over you I feel like when someone just understands where you come from because they understand a bit of you with you without even having to say a word and you know we've certainly done a good amount of touring with people who aren't from where we're from and there's not that that's not wonderful too because that's always you know learning and making some of my best friends from other places that have brought me into their world as well but on this tour it feels like it's everybody knows it just feels very familiar and like there's no yeah barriers between anything and it's got a really good energy around it for us right now.
It's nice to kind of be able to just speak the same language as the
Yeah,
people you're around.
absolutely.
Um, and I also think like one of the really cool things about this whole community is like it, because it's more than just the music, because it's like kind of feeling kind of a sense of connection to the story, and like I think some feeling of like realness too, like not like just like that you get the sense that everybody's being very sincere with what they're doing, um, no matter how they sound, and like I think it kind of fosters like an openness to like musical sort of diversity. Like, I mean, if you like, especially to look at just Turnover and Citizen, like, you know, on the split EP, like you're kind of doing the same style of music. Like you sound different, but you know, like I
Hmm.
think big
Totally.
picture. But
Absolutely.
like if you look at both of your catalogs, they're just wildly different in so many different ways at this point, you know, and like um and even like I mean like I also like, you know, just because of course Title Fight have come up a lot, like with Peripheral Vision and Hyperview coming out the same year, I also think is really interesting because it's like I feel like you and them sort of tapped into a couple similar ideas on those records around the same time, probably have a happenstance. Um, and you it's like you kind of get in a way to challenge the fans and sort of teach the fans. I don't mean that like in a patronizing way, but like you get to kind of be maybe like the run for cover punk emo band that maybe gets someone to like discover the Captured Tracks catalog. You know what I mean? Like it's like and I think in this scene in particular too, because there is sort of a protectiveness sometimes. Sometimes people feel like you know, some things are in, some things are out. And I do think that can also get a bit toxic at times. But I think because of that, it's like I've always really admired those bands that look outside and bring something new in. Like, you know, like I mean, me growing up, like, I don't know, I remember like Manchester Orchestra were always kind of in that world, but they were pulling from so many other things. And so they like became like kind of a gateway for me. Like I was like, oh, I'm gonna get into like all their influences that are kind of new to me, you know, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there that Peripheral Vision was like that kind of record for.
I mean, yeah, man, that's really, I mean, that is, I mean, it's not like wake up with the intention every day of like, this is my purpose or something like that. But I mean, in my subconscious, like, that's definitely what I mean, there's just, I mean, I think touching on what you said about sincerity, I think is such a huge part of it. It's because it's like, if you don't, if it was easy for somebody to get, how am I going to trust them with my, I mean, of course there's some music that you just listen to because it's really fun, you know what I mean? But I feel like if you enter into the pact between artist and, you know, person consuming the art on something that you're both choosing to um, put vulnerability into, then there has to be a trust there. And because you're going to give something your absolute passion and love. And for that to for you to trust somebody to give you that, I feel like there has to be something there to show that that person wasn't just fucking going through the motions when they made it. And I feel like coming from like where we come from, um, it kind of like says that a little bit more so than some styles of music, or just not from having built it with your own community. I think because you have to do things like we're saying, like sleep in your van to record a record, or you know, play shows to nobody, or you know, pay to pressure on vinyl, or whatever the case may be. It's like if you're gonna sacrifice a bit of yourself to make this art, there's a bit of it where it's like I'm gonna listen to it because I know that you actually care about it. And I feel like, yeah, it's for me, it's like any artist that's ever been able to affect me in that way. It's just, I mean, I mean, they say, you know, what is it? Imitation is the highest form of compliment or whatever. And I feel like it's exactly that. You know, I mean, it's like if when I've heard music in my life that has affected me so emotionally, especially when it's something that I feel like is new to me. You know, like Nick from Citizen actually said to me one time, he was like, "Isn't it the coolest feeling in the world to think that you might not have heard your favorite song yet?" And I was like, "That actually is amazing," because there's been so many times in my life where I've been like, yes, I mean, you know, since I was in first grade, from the time I was 15, my favorite band was Blink 182, and I like you're like, yeah, this is it. And now that's like, you know, that my I've had a new favorite band so many times, or a new favorite song so many times, and anytime somebody can, for one, affect me in a style or a way that I already am a fan of, that's of course beautiful and enough. But anytime there's that separate thing of being challenged and truly learning through art and learning something that you didn't know you loved and now you love more than anything else is, I mean, the the one of the reasons that is the most important for us doing it, you know, because I'm just so indebted to all of the artists that have done that for me, and I hope we can be that for anyone, you know what I mean. And there definitely are bands like you're saying that have always kind of been like that within, I feel like people that are younger listeners to music, and I'm happy if we can be included in like one of those groups that happens to be able to grab you when you're 17 and you can still be a fan when you're 60. You know what I mean? Because I do feel like those aren't as plentiful.
Yeah. What is the most recent thing you've heard that kind of like challenged you, or like, you know, like that you made you feel like, oh, like I don't know if I've heard this before or felt this before?
Most recently, musically, man, I would have to say maybe kind of two-parted. I really, well, mostly I would have to say it would have to be techno over the last year and a half or two, just because it was a style of music that, like, I've obviously, if you listen to the last few Turnover records, I'm definitely a fan of dance music in all types, especially, you know, like I think that's why I love disco or, you know, like Bronski beat or anything like that, because it's dancey, but it has this like depth of emotion to it that I feel like just my head enjoys so much, like the combination of like really well thought out melodies that bring out a lot of depth, but then it also makes you want to move. But techno, I could never um, really get into as much because I just heard it, like I just couldn't hear the dynamic of it. But moving to LA, I mean, I had gone to a few raves at Basement and stuff in New York. Have you ever been to Basement?
I've been to Knockdown Center, which is Basement is part of, but I actually haven't done Basement yet.
Nice, you should go if you get a chance, man. It's amazing. But I started when I moved to LA. I feel like going much more often, and there's a really cool community of people out here that like throw raves and press vinyl and have like really well curated techno stuff in the city. And so it's been a really good environment to like go to more of the shows at, and I've honestly fell in love with it in a really really crazy way, just because I feel like it's kind of you know, like I was saying, I feel like when I loved Blink 182 when I was a kid, because there's something, I mean, not all music I feel like is supposed to make you want to move, but for me, I've always been drawn towards music that is kind of energizing. I would say, in a, you know, of course, there's times when I want to listen to the saddest piano ballad of all time and just not move. But I would say for myself, like, you know, I came up loving punk music, so of course, like, I like something that's kind of energizing and makes you want to move, which I feel like is why I also am into funk or disco or, you know, heavy psych rock, like anything that has a nice rhythm to it. Um, but techno, yeah, I just it's got that in such a deep way. Like the rhythms of it, like a lot of people, myself included, when I first started listening to it, just heard the four on the floor and thought it was kind of, you know, one dimensional. But that's kind of like listening to like everything from, you know, circle jerks to title fight and being like it sounds the same because it has a D beat. You know what I mean? So I really feel like I like it had discovered such a depth for the rhythm of it, and a lot of it is so electronic music in general. I feel like is like just pushing the boundaries of music in so many ways. Like there's straight up pieces of classical music just written over, you know, so much of electronic music. I feel like it's the most wonderfully arranged, beautiful melodies that exist in music right now. And so it's got an amazing sense of melody, but like at the same time, in order for it to really be functioning as techno in the way that it kind of like I feel like, techno gets thrown away around in the way that hardcore gets thrown around. And there's a lot of it that isn't like this, but I feel like real techno, you can kind of know it when you hear it, and a certain element of it has to be maybe not minimal, but if very efficient, because you really want to hear every aspect of it. You know what I mean? Like you want to hear the exact shape of the kick drum, and you want to hear exactly the shape of the arpeggiator, or the whatever you might have going. So I feel like it's like really beautifully arranged with really efficient use of all of its elements. And the production side of it is just so beautiful too, because of that same reason. Like you can't have a lot of things clouding up what it sounds like, or you'll lose the rhythm. So I feel like it's honestly inspired me. And I mean, I make techno music a lot now, and the things that I've learned through making it have taught me so much about every type of music I make now. Like when I'm writing a turnover song, there's so many things from working with sequencers that I know about rhythms now, and that when I'm thinking about my guitar tone, I know so much more about the shape of sounds from working with the synths I have to make sounds, and everything that goes into it, like using arpeggiators and learning different steps and how it all works together musically. It gets taught me a ton. So yeah, I would say that has been my most recent, like, completely opening of a new door that's been like life changing, has been techno. My favorite artist is probably this dude Surgeon from the UK. He's absolutely amazing. But there's a lot of really good ones that are around right now. I'm actually going to a epic one on Friday, a party out here called Wall of Sound with this dude DVS1 from Minneapolis. Who That's kind of rare. I feel like there's actually not too many American DJs right now who are really big in the techno world. I saw DJ Stingray the other day, and he's from Detroit, and he's awesome. But yeah, I'm really excited to see him. And yeah, I would say that. And I feel like through electronic music, I kind of got into like film scores and classical music a little more, just because, kind of like we're saying, like it taught me a little bit, like, I was into Aphex Twin or Boards of Canada, or, house music, and, or there's a modern artist that I really like called Floating Points, that, like, he actually did a record with Pharoah Sanders. Like, he has an album that, I mean, it's like a lot of like UK garage and some like, yeah, I mean, like two-step stuff, like some sort of techno-ish elements to it, but Floating Points, and his music is like straight up like it. Like I was saying, it sounds like it's like classical music over it. So I feel like through the like rhythm being pulling me in through dance music, that's one style of music I've never really gotten into, was like classical music or scores or anything like that. And I mean, I like love, music with piano. I love jazz. There's no reason I shouldn't have ever been into it, but for some reason I had never been into it. And I feel like through some of the electronic music that's more kind of arranged in that sort of way, got into listening to a little bit more. Just, I mean, I don't know like classical music in terms of talking about it by composer or anything, but there's a good station here in LA that I throw on all the time. And my wife thinks I'm crazy. She's like, you should have the classical music radio station on. But there's been a lot of modern film scores that I feel like are just like some of the, I guess that's probably, of course, how it's always been. Film scores have been some of the best music, but I'm starting to be at my point in my life where I appreciate it hella. Like that dude, I'm not sure exactly how to say the name, but that did the Jackie score is amazing. The person who did the new one for the Zone of Interest was incredible. The dude that used to play in that band, Yuck, Daniel Bloomberg, just did one for that movie, The Brutalist, that just came out. That's insanely beautiful. So I've been listening to those when I can. I feel like, because that's also an inspiring thing to me, because like a lot of people who start in rock music kind of transition to that, like all PTA stuff being Johnny Greenwood and the Desners from, or one of the Desners from The National scores a lot of movies now. And obviously like Trent Reznor and Atticus. So I feel like that's another thing because I'm always insatiable in my journey through music, I feel like. And sometimes you can start to feel like, I mean, I know I haven't heard everything, of course, but you kind of get lost in the jungle of like where to go next. So always like looking to people like that have come before you, like in that same way to see kind of where to go. And I feel like a lot of the, like Radiohead, The National, Nine Inch Nails, all some of the most incredible artists to me, and seeing that they all went that direction kind of is like, oh, okay, maybe that'd be a good route to kind of draw inspiration from. So I've been feeling that a lot recently too.
And I feel like I wonder if you relate to this or not, but I feel like when you kind of bring yourself into a musical world that's that far away from like maybe what your bread and butter, so to speak, might be, it's like you can kind of feel like 15 again because it's like everything's new, like it's like for me, right, like I've probably heard like enough of like the greatest punk records of all time. You know what I mean? There's probably a couple gems I've never heard, and like I'll hear them one day and I'll be like, what a huge missing link. But it's like harder and harder to find those moments. But like to go far away from that and like pick like a style of music that's just like created so differently and has such a different purpose, it's like you get to feel like you're exploring something for the very first time, the way it felt when you like first heard Blink 182, for example.
100%, man. Yeah, it really does feel that way. And I was talking to our homie that he was he does a lot of our like on tour visuals and stuff. This dude Vitor from Brazil, he's awesome. But I was talking to him about that because he in the last 5 or 6 years has gotten a lot deeper into electronic music, and we were saying just that thing about how it feels like the first time I like went to a hardcore show and I was like, holy fuck, this is legal. You know what I mean? Like it's like almost that same newness. Like I feel like yeah, just like everything I hear, like what the culture is like surrounding it is all so foreign that it's you can almost view it with like a, not that I feel like I really with rock music. Well, actually I am actually probably pretty guilty of this. It's kind of hard for me to listen to music that, I mean, at this point Turnover's style of music has become so all encompassing that I honestly feel there are very few types of music that I even hear anymore that I don't think, let's make this a Turnover song. You know what I mean? So it's pretty hard for me to listen to music that and not somewhere in my mind be thinking about it in an analytical way. Because if I enjoy it, I'm like dissecting it, and I'm like, at this point, I feel like I've written so many songs and just been living music so deeply for so long that, I mean, it's like, it's probably some sort of like ADD thing or something, but like, I like if I have something that's like playing, I mean, there's all the time where like literally I'll have to ask Morgan to repeat herself because I'm just like literally thinking about like what is that chord progression or something so stupid, you know what I mean? And so I feel like a lot of times with any sort of rock music or even at this point like jazz and like pop, I'm always kind of listening to it from this analytical and perspective where the curtain has been very drawn back. But yeah, with like some of that, yeah, the techno stuff, and I mean the techno stuff is honestly starting to get there now because I've delved so deep into it that now it's like when I'm listening to it, I'm really listening to it and trying to figure out how they do it. But it's definitely like the newness of it is inspiring, and it's just nice to be able to feel that when you're I'm 32. And I feel like I do have a lot of friends who have given up on that feeling. You know what I mean? They're like, "Oh yeah, I mean, my favorite stuff is the same shit I liked in high school because I mean, whatever the case might be. I mean, that's the other thing we were talking about, right? Is like it takes a certain amount of work and trust to fall in love with art and to make art that you want people to fall in love with. And people might just not have time to put in that work, and that's, I do have the time, and I do still do that so often. But yeah, to be able to feel like it's just completely brand new again when I'm 32, and is a nice thing for the mind to just be like, yo, you never know what is going to literally happen tomorrow. Like I said, I could hear my favorite song of all time tomorrow. So it's
Yeah.
it's inspiring.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. It's like it. I think it takes a little bit more work with age, and I agree. Like, I've definitely have friends who are just like, I kind of cap myself at anything I got into up through age like 22, 23, and I'm okay with that. And it's like, um, I think sometimes you have to push yourself to be like, I'm not going to stay in my comfort zone. But then when you do and you find that new thing, like, it's so worth it, I think.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah. Well, on that note, anything you want to add before we say goodbye?
Man, just it's been a pleasure talking. Like I said, this one of the coolest things about this whole experience has just been doing exactly what we're doing and just getting to reflect with people in different capacities of turnover's journey. And through talking to you these couple times, I definitely understand that you know where we come from, and you're a part of this whole thing that we're talking about. And getting to talk to people of all different types of this world that we quite literally have built is been my favorite thing so far since we haven't played the shows. And whether it's our agent or the other guys in the band or just random fans, like I went to see freaking Goth Boy Click and Wicca Phase the other day with Adam from Tiger Shaw, and ran into some fool outside who was like, dude, I'm so excited to see the show in May. Like, I'm a huge fan, like, also decked out in GBC gear, and see that there are turnover fans in like every little corner of things, and see how they feel about the tour. And yeah, I'm just so grateful to all of them. And yeah, to you for, having this convo with me. Because like I said, I really enjoy it and feel like I get to understand this world a little bit more, everybody that I get to know in it. So yeah, thank you to all the fans, and can't wait to see all y'all, and can't wait to see you, man. You gonna pull up to the Brooklyn shows?
Yeah, I definitely plan to.
Hell yeah, man. Let's kick it.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, Austin. Have a good day.
All right, man. You too.
Hey, thanks again for listening. Thanks to Austin for coming on the show. As a reminder, you can catch Turnover on their Peripheral Vision 10th anniversary tour this year. They've also got a 10th anniversary edition of the album with bonus tracks and more. And there is an exclusive Brooklyn Vegan candied avocado vinyl variant up for pre-order now at shop.brooklynvegan.com. It's limited to just 500 copies, so get yours while they last. And the full link is also included in the description of this episode. If you like what you heard, tell your friends about us, give us a rating, subscribe. All that little stuff goes a really long way, and we really appreciate it. Thanks so much, and see you next time.